Welcome to Curious Goldfish, a podcast community where music and curiosity come together through interesting conversations with the music makers of our world. I'm your host, Jason English. You can find Curious Goldfish in all the major podcast and social media platforms, and of course, we have all of our content on our website, curiousgoldfish.com. Hey, Jennifer. So good to see you. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh my gosh, Jason, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here hanging out with a good old Midwestern friend.
Right? Can you believe we're both born and raised in the Midwest? So I'm from Missouri. Obviously, you're from Kansas. Growing up in Missouri, Kansas was always what prohibited us from getting to Colorado. so,
Well, and I always had like state envy because you guys were like the show me state and so much cooler, like the coolest next door neighbors. Like Kansas, like we had like an inferiority complex, I think.
oh my gosh, I don't know about that, but yeah, no. And as I've gotten older, by the way, I think we were talking. We just turned 50, but you've got me by 3 days, so you're a little bit older than me, which is great.
I have so much more wisdom than you, Jason.
No, but as I've gotten older, I've actually appreciated Kansas a lot more. The Flint Hills and the prairies and everything. So it's good. I don't have quite the issue that I had with Kansas when I was growing up in Missouri, but it's all good.
When you get older and wiser, I've got a few songs we can maybe talk about at some point. But I mean, and I don't know if you relate to this as well, like being from the Midwest. But I grew up in a town much smaller than Columbia, Missouri, which is where you're from. But the hometown I grew up in, I think now is about 8,000 people, give or take a few thousand people through the years. But I grew up in a town in the Midwest where one of the things I talk about is just like, you only succeed if you don't live there anymore, which is a really bad kind of way
Right.
to talk about the people who inspire you when you're growing up. But, when you're a kid, most of the time, all you can think about is like getting out of your, one stoplight, one horse town and thinking about getting on to bigger, better things. But as I've grown up, I've started to appreciate, like you said, like the things when you're a kid, it's a little harder to appreciate the kind of patience that it takes to stop and observe the world around you. Like the Flint Hills, like it's one of my favorite drives on all the planet. And I've been to a lot of places and there's nothing like it. And there's a spot, on I-70 when you're driving to Colorado and it seems infernally long to everybody. And that's all everybody says, it's like, it's just in the way of me getting to Colorado. But, there are moments and there's one particular moment that you only get when you're driving west to Colorado on I-70, or heading west in that way, and all of a sudden the vista just opens up. You've thought that you're just on this flat, nothing plain, and then you all of a sudden actually see the world around you and what's happening. And It is one of the most beautiful things. And granted, it does go on for a few hours looking like that, but it is... I think, the older I get, the more I appreciate getting the opportunity to actually spend time taking that beauty in and not just to let it pass by or to, just to think it's something that I can write off because it's like, oh, I've seen it, check it off a list. I think to see the beauty in things, and it takes a little time and some patience. And that's kind of one of the things that I as I've grown older and time has gone by, that I've definitely come to appreciate about my homeland.
No, that's awesome. Well, I have two Kansas the state related questions. Then obviously we'll get to the Kansas 25, all the great news about that, your new album. So I know you came into contemporary Christian music late 90s. Was your timing ever crossing with Rich Mullins when he was in Wichita, or was he in Wichita before you sort of got into the industry?
Yeah, that sounds familiar to me. Did he live there for a while? I think.
Yeah, he was in Wichita, and then obviously, I think in the late '90s, right before he died, he was in New Mexico on the reservation
Yeah,
teaching music. I
I
just
know.
didn't know if,
Yeah, I never got
yeah,
to meet him. Obviously, Nashville is the kind of the center of a lot of contemporary Christian recording artists. So, I mean, I knew a lot of his friends and contemporaries,
right,
and in fact, there was a lot that I felt really fortunate when I first came to Nashville, probably, in the late 90s. There's a sleepy little pub called Sherlock Holmes, or just Sherlock's. It was like this little Irish pub. It was like super dark, and they would serve haggis on St. Patrick's Day, and they had like the best pint of Guinness you could find anywhere. That they just poured the best pint. And I got to go hang out there with a bunch of folks. And in fact, we'll talk about him later, but Steve Hindalong, who's producing this record, was one of the guys that I met kind of a long time back. But that's all to say is that there were a cohort of kind of just, people in the same vein and spirit. It worked a lot with Rich, but I really, I was really sad when he passed because I never really got a chance to meet him. He seemed like kind of my kind of people. And I was really, I was working so heavily at the time when I was there. It was really unfortunate that, particularly as a young kid, I didn't really get to connect to some of the people who I thought were my people. And Rich was certainly one of them.
Well, he was the one that, in his music, he talked a lot about Kansas, right? There's songs about, calling out your name and other ones that, he really embodied and embraced living in Kansas. And so anyway, that reminded me when we were talking about, the beauty of Kansas, I wanted to ask you about that. And then also, I think, this podcast is inspired by Ted Lasso. So what a great representative of the state of Kansas, right? How cool was that?
I know we're having like a Midwest resurgence in modern culture. It's great. You, me, and Ted Lasso, we're bringing the Midwest to represent.
I mean, he was kind of,
and I see as I'm looking at your video, I notice you have an Ozzie Smith, who is the shortstop of the St. Louis Cardinals, and a Bo Jackson, who played center field for the Kansas City Royals. We're in the heart of baseball season, and it's about 10 years on, but I deeply enjoyed when the Kansas City Royals won the World Series in 2015. So, and of course a Kansas City Chiefs fan as well. So it's nice to see, the times that we pop up with good street cred, because as you and I both well know, it's sometimes that it's a forgotten kind of middle part of America that's easy for people to drive through and just want to hurriedly kind of rush by.
Yeah, fly over country no more. So anyway, that's awesome.
Ted Lasso represent. The only grievance I have actually with Ted Lasso is that and almost a character flaw, I will say, is his distaste for hot tea, because my partner's Australian, and I am also an Australian citizen, which, connects me to the Commonwealth. And a cup of tea, I don't start my day without a good cup of tea. So his assertion that it's just brown, tasteless water is, short-sighted and does not speak well of my Midwestern roots. I'm like, come on, mate, you don't even know how great your life could be if you just sat back and enjoyed a cup of tea. But I'm so envious that I can't have one of his biscuits to go with my cup of tea, otherwise known as a cookie.
Right. Well, I think they've posted the recipe for that, and I've always wanted to,
Oh, did they? I'll have to get into that. That's amazing.
Yeah, there's a recipe. Yeah. So, all right. Well, duly noted on the tea. No one's perfect, not even Ted Lasso. So that's good.
Indeed.
All right, well, you've been busy the last couple of months recording Kansas 25, right? So congratulations on that. And at the time of this conversation, we're about a week and a half from its release, right? So that's obviously 25 years in the making, since the original was produced. I guess for you, how did the process differ, like the last month and a half, 2 months, from what you recalled having gone through, in the late 90s, the first time around?
Yeah. Well, and for those who don't know, I mean, I recorded my very first record in 1998, my first signed record. So I got signed with a record label called Goatee, and they had literally plucked. We've been talking a lot about Kansas. That's the theme for the day. They plucked me out of Kansas, where I was doing a lot of, just kind of random church gigs in and around the Midwest, and recorded that record. In fact, it got its name because none of us really knew what to call it. And I was just like this weird kid that nobody coming into Nashville who hadn't been to, I thought Nashville was a huge city at that point when I moved in. It felt like, really hitting the big time. And but yeah, Toby McKeon, who of course is Toby Mac or T Mac from DC Talk fame, owned the record label. We didn't know what to call the record, and he just ended up calling it Kansas because that's where I was from. He's just like, I don't know, just you're Kansas. It's like, and it was evocative to him of some place that he'd never been and didn't hang out and wasn't really familiar to him. So that to him was, I think, the name that kind of stuck on the record. But 25, so in like toward the end of last year, which, officially last year, 2023 was a 25-year anniversary of that record. And a lot's happened in that time. I'm still, creating music, which is a wonderful thing. The record's gone through a couple of prints, and but a lot of people have carried that record through the years. I'm 50 at this point, and a lot of the people who still love and adore that record have gone through a lot. You and I were talking pre-broadcast that, our lives have changed a lot since, in that time. We, a lot of us have like grown up. We've gotten into middle age. We knew who we are. We've had heartbreaks and successes, and also questioned the meaning of life and all of the things in between. And for whatever reason, this record has kind of stuck with the people who, grabbed a hold of it, I think, early on in their adulthood, and I think kind of got along board with the things that I was going through the time, just trying to like work my way through as a songwriter, kind of thinking about who I wanted to be when I grew up, and meaningfully, in such a way. So getting back into recording it was a celebration of that. And I think one of the things that I wanted to accomplish was, in going back, was like, I was just curious artistically, is like, what, I still play some of these songs from time to time in my live shows, but I was also like curious what they would sound like, because I know I play them different, but I never go back, and I never go back and listen to my own records or my own recordings. Ugh. But so I made a rule that I wasn't going to listen to it, but I originally planned on just going to the studio and just putting up a microphone and like plugging in my guitar and just playing the versions of the song live. And then I was talking to my friend Steve Hindelong, who produced the record. We started to kind of dress it up a little bit. So it's still like a pretty raw and live performance, but that was kind of one of the ideas, is I wanted to kind of revisit those songs and see how they changed with me, because I know I've changed personally. But there's also a subplot to it as well, is that, and for those, unfamiliar with my history and trajectory, I got my start in Christian music, when I was in my 20s. And, this is a Christian record, but also I came out later and married my wife. We've been together over 20 years. And when I did that, that was a big controversy inside of faith communities, because, like the contest between conservative Christians who genuinely do not support LGBTQ plus people inside of their faith communities. Now, granted, there are a lot of churches who do support LGBTQ people, but where I came from and a lot of the audiences that had grown up listening to me, I probably, pissed off half of them and disappointed a lot of them because I was gay. And I think not only that, I don't think that's a unique thing. I think a lot of us, through our life experiences, when we have like real life experiences and they don't match this kind of pristine timeline that I think sometimes conservative evangelicalism can represent. And my audience is no different. I mean, we've been married, we've been divorced, we've had losses, we've buried children, we've decided whether or not we're going to raise our children in the church, and 1,000 other things in between. We've come up short on our income taxes, 1,000 things. And we've been disappointing and we've succeeded. And in the middle of all that, I think for people who kind of somewhat understand what it's like to take on ownership of our spiritual selves, as well as, just not just living life as a machine and going through the day-to-day, checking off the boxes. There was a part in going back to Kansas that felt like being able to celebrate that was a little bit of rebellious resistance to saying, you try and write us out of the church or the narrative, or say that, if we kind of go off the beaten path a little bit, that there's some way that we've somehow been a failure. And I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of people have carried the success of this, and we've grown into really outstanding human beings. I mean, I'm amazed by my audience. I mean, so many people that come to my shows are working in mental health, are working in, in nonprofits that are giving back to the world. And not just that. I mean, most of those people, even if, I'm no truck drivers that are working, in truck driving, but they think about themselves as being genuinely part of their community. They're extraordinarily rich people that have held on to this record for one way or another. And by, the simple idea that we can write people off because, write out something that's been meaningful to our communities was something that was kind of a little fun subtext to be able to go back and record this record, knowing that it represented that. It was a way of us, I think a lot of us inside of this community and kind of having traveled that journey to be able to celebrate that together, to be able to know that just because we've aged doesn't mean that we can't still see sing the songs of our youth and celebrate that journey along the way.
Right. No, that's great. Who do you think the audience is for this one this time around? Is it the same?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of diehard fans out there. It's been really kind of fun because, I've been back doing music now for about 15 years, and I still, there'll be some conservative evangelicals that hadn't heard about me in a while will be familiar with my name, and this record will come up, and then they'll see me, and they'll go, oh, wrong room. So that'll be fun. But, I think there'll be a lot of, and I'm picking up some new singer-songwriter fans along the way. You and I were talking before that, I grew up listening to Tracy Chapman and Shawn Colvin and Lisa Loeb and the Cowboy Junkies and, the Indigo Girls. And a lot of those audiences I've been playing in and around for a while. So for those who aren't afraid and have figured out that I'm not a terrifying, Christian trying to, woo them over to some holy, sanctuary kind of place, for those kind of, I've picked up some new fans along the way that aren't necessarily invested in the Christian side of it. But, I think for the most part, I'll be happy if we find the people who know and love this record, have a copy of it to be able to celebrate that journey. I wasn't really expecting it or treating this record like it's some, new amazing release that needs to be, pushed to and make new fans. It's mostly been made for the old fans and updated for our contemporary ears, and that's so far the people that have been able to. We've probably been playing it for about 2 or 3. I think maybe a couple of weeks ago we had some downloads available. So the insiders that were helping us get this project off the ground, and for those of you familiar with crowdsourcing campaigns like Kickstarter, it was largely funded by just a few hundred people. Those few hundred people were already listening to it, and they're just blown away by the project. I mean, it's been, it's one thing to kind of have an idea about what you hope it will accomplish in terms of, especially when you use these songs have been around forever and everybody's familiar with them, but you kind of hope that when you play them and that they'll look different and they'll feel different and represent you in the here and now. I can never really, you can't really guarantee that. You just kind of do it and hope that it does because, it's being played in older bodies. And I mean, I don't think anybody under the age of 50 played on this record, which was pretty cool. We're all pretty old and wise in doing it. But it's been really nice to see that, the people it was intended to be a gift for have been there to receive it. And I hope along the way, I suspect along the way some new people will find it, and they might be a little bit confused, I think, because it's not like I'm working a Christian music career at this point, but at the same time, I think that's part of, I think that's it's an interesting topic to kind of get into because I've debated about it for a long time. Like, how much do I talk about faith or spirituality when what I want to do is go out and kind of live a quote unquote normal life, as opposed to, having a career where I'm, working in ministry or something like that. It doesn't mean that I don't have a service, but for musicians in particular, especially coming out of contemporary Christian music where people somewhat anticipate if you write that way and you're interested in things like that you're also on a mission to convert people to where you are, and that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah,
for me
that's
anyway.
Good. I like how you put that. It's almost, if I could summarize, it's almost like it's like a thank you, to the kind of your OG sort of fan club and crew, right? And it's
definitely
sort of
OG,
a tribute. Yeah, it's sort of a tribute to that time where you came on really strong, really fast, and this album was different than everything else at the time. And so there's a symbol there that you want to pay tribute to. And then I love how the fact that in the last 25 years, so much has changed in the world with you personally, with all of us that are in this demographic. And so it's sort of an acknowledgement of that and everything kind of comes back around, and the songs, I think no matter where you're at in your faith and kind of on the spectrum of Christianity, they still resonate, and because to me, it's like an album of prayers and psalms, so I think it's
Yeah,
completely relevant. I
and
like
that's
how you
how I
put that.
originally wrote a lot of them. I was just
Yeah.
like I was a kid, and as a young adult in college, and started hanging out with my church, and a lot of my friends were like, "Well, why don't you write about what experience is like for you?" And so a lot of the songs on this record weren't made to be on the radio, weren't made to woo anyone. They were just basically kind of like prayers and journal entries, and me kind of
Yeah.
sorting out, I grew up in the Midwest. Like, there's a church on every corner. And
Right.
at the same time, I wouldn't describe my family particularly as religious, just God's around. It's just a kind of a thing. And it's part of culture, but not necessarily, I didn't have a lot of exposure to people, outside of pastors, that was their life's work. But the rest of us, 99.9% of us that ever went to church or were inside of church, we're there because we were, I don't know, like we were engaging in a world and reaching out to something greater than ourselves and having that kind of faith and spiritual
Yeah.
support and community. That was familiar to me. But when I started, as a young college student, hanging out with a lot of evangelicals, it was like I thought I knew the church, and I did not. Like, it was a culture shift. It was all of a sudden like you're living in sin kind of conversations, or you have to put away these temptations, and there were like a lot of do's and a lot of don'ts, and it was really hard for me to process and get my head around why all of a sudden one day I was good in the eyes of people that I was going to church with, and then the next day I could do something that made them question whether or not I was genuinely serious about my prayers and
Right.
my reaching out to connect to my spiritual maker, I guess. And so I think a lot of that consternation actually built, and like nowadays, like there's this kind of movement called the deconstruction movement, which
Right.
is kind of centered around a lot, especially a lot of us who came through the 90s and the early 2000s, kind of very familiar with evangelical Christianity and a lot of the marketing that made Christianity cool for a while. A lot of cool music. You didn't have to wear pantyhose going to church anymore. The rise
Right.
of the mega church, and even to some degree, like it was like okay to be a Christian. It didn't seem like such an anomaly there for a while. And youth groups were like, there were big youth conferences in the tens of thousands, of which we were all products of in some way. Like, and I was part of that
Yeah.
as a musician inside of that culture. Well, we grew up, and now we're thinking for ourselves. And like I said, we have some real life scenarios with which our spirituality and the way that we kind of process our decision making paradigms and trying to figure out who we want to be as human beings, like morally in this world and ethically in this world. Religion has a really great tradition of being able to help us navigate through that. But when we are busting the system and not participating with the religion and upholding the religion, as opposed to having a life where we're actually seeking to have deeply meaningful lives, I was kind of working that out in my 20s. And before I knew it, I was about 15 or 20 years ahead of the deconstruction curve, which we're kind of experiencing now. So that is kind of a weird thing about this record, that is bizarre how it's kind of stood the test of time in that regard. But
Yeah.
I digress in saying that it goes back to me. I own it. I claim it in the space of that these weren't made or none of these songs were made or manufactured trying to represent myself or trying to be likable or pleasing to a Christian environment or even to God. They were just genuine and innocent prayers that no one had to witness, that I for whatever reason, decided to bring out of my little college bedroom. And, I initially played for my church and for my friends, and then my church. And then before I know it, I'm in Chicago. And before I know it, I've signed a record deal. And before I know it, it's 30 years later. And, those prayers are a moment in time of a kid who was genuinely seeking to try and make sense of something that hit me in the heart, but didn't always make sense to me in the day-to-day practical stuff. And I think that's where a lot of folks are, deciding, whether or not we're going to raise our kids that way, or if we're going to go back to church, or what, how are we going to connect with other people about the things that we want to and need to spiritually, but don't necessarily want to get wrapped up into, having to be a poster child, or we're not necessarily looking to join a group, but we're looking to connect to other people and be involved and engaged. So I think that's something I've been working on for the last 30 years. And I think that's part of the interesting part of reclaiming this record and going back. And even when I judge it, or there are some songs that I went to perform that I'm like, oh man, I can't believe I wrote that. I would so drank the Kool-Aid. But also inside of that was an earnestness to just go, I'm really in that space now. I might not say it the same way. I may not necessarily, raise my hand and say, oh Lord, please deliver me. But I genuinely, earnestly might, or, I do the hard work in my personal life to kind of, to shape and continue to be involved in my own person and who I am in the world, and how I want to be a positive and a loving human being in the world. And my faith tradition can teach me a lot about that, but I also know that I offend my faith tradition equally as well when I bucket, because sometimes I have to learn things and go out and my advocacy in LGBTQ plus stuff, and going and talking to churches and talking about how meaningful that is to the LGBTQ plus community has been one of those things where I never saw myself and didn't really imagine kind of entering back into. But I think the songs have been really interesting and kind of keeping me connected at times when I've genuinely tried to get unconnected.
No, that's cool. And you touched on it, but I do want to ask you, and I think I was tracking, because knowing your journey in the last 25 years, going back, and the fact that you came into your faith in college, not late, but a lot of, so I grew up in Missouri, buckled the Bible belt, was in church all the time growing up. It's basically my childhood. And there's a lot of us that experienced that. You were a little bit later, but once you became a Christian, it feels like the depth of your lyrics on this album that you're now re-releasing and doing over. It's like you were in church and had faith since you were 18 months old, that's what's crazy about this album is, it might as well, I'm not going to compare it to the book of Psalms, right, with David, but the words, the melodies, it's almost like, when you fall in love, and I'm not a songwriter, but I can imagine if I fell in love, all the emotions and the feelings that I would want to put down on paper, it's almost like you took a newfound faith and dumped it all in your journaling and in your songwriting, because it's so in depth and it's so unique. And that's the picture I have in my head. Is that somewhat accurate? I think you touched on it, right?
Well, it's certainly a great compliment. I appreciate that. I think back to those times, and I was diving into the Bible a lot. I mean, one of the things that, when you're new to the church and I took my I'll use the D word, discipleship seriously. I mean, I felt definitely behind the curve for all my other friends who had grown up in the church or had families who had long, deep histories of, going to church, 3 or 4 days a week. I didn't know anything about the Bible. And, I became, I read the Bible with a lot of adoration, and I still do. I think it's an amazing text. And, but I did what I was told, and I actually read it and I studied it, and it was a profoundly, and I think, there's a lot of amazing wisdom in there, and there's also a lot of wacky stuff. But I'm not a biblical literalist by any means, but I think, with all the controversy, I think it's one of the critiques that I have about people's misunderstanding about what to do with the Bible. I mean, it's an incredible witness to what deep thinking and what a spiritual life is like. It's a collection of all the people who've been doing this for thousands of years, and then one day we just stopped kind of collecting it. Well, I was reading a ton of Psalms during that time. I was trying to understand the big picture, not just a scripture at a time, but what is the whole, what does this whole chapter, what does this whole chapter mean in light of this verse? and then spreading it out from there. What does this book mean? What does this whole Bible mean? What does this whole century mean? What does this mean, and what connects me to it now? And as bizarre as it was, I mean, I really got in depth, and I loved it to the ends, that it's actually one of the things that, it's not necessarily the Bible that's kept me in it, but the intrigue about theology and the way that God may or may not be, or whatever God is, and connecting to that, led me, some years later to have the opportunity to go back and get my master's degree in theology. So I didn't realize that what I'd started all those years ago was like a really intense academic and deep dive into not just the surface of saying, oh, Jesus saves or something like that, but to kind of really actually understand something deep, what we mean when we talk about something that's actually redemptive, or when we talk about liberation. Or no, I still think of the work that I do as, I hope genuinely that everywhere I go that people feel a deep sense of their worth and their dignity, and a sense of, the depth of what love can mean to them, and what can be done when we are giving the depths of our love to somebody else, and what it means to be graceful, and what it means to be free of shame, and all of the things that kind of hold us back when we're angry or frustrated, that inhibit love from being able to happen. I think these things are readily available in understanding that. And that's what blew my mind, actually, when I started to get into this space. And it's still what attracts me to it, even though it's this weird kind of, it has this weird relationship with institutionalization and authority, and the justification of what somebody allows, decides who they're going to love and how they're going to love. And I mean, I was sitting there like early on in my days getting into doing exactly what people told me to do, which is read the Bible. And I did. And I got there and I'm like, wow, what you guys are doing is totally different than what's in here. Like, this is kind of weird. So that was the way that I write it. But it clearly profoundly shaped my life. And I've had to kind of deal with the honesty that it has, and even to this day kind of go, I don't know, am I a Christian? Do I want to be a Christian? And I kind of care less about that. But what I'm really grateful for is every time that I've found another human being on the planet who understands even just a little bit about love, a little bit about being a person in the world who is interested in finding the glory and the beauty of the most unsuspecting people, and their liberation. They literally want to see them succeed, because you want to see them fly. There's nothing more amazing than loving somebody and then setting them free to be, and wanting them to succeed, and being there when it doesn't work out. But all of that kind of stuff wrapped up into it was all of this kind of culture clash that I was going, oh wow, all of that was in that little discipleship kind of space that I took on, and which I think makes that book, the Bible, pretty extraordinary if you read it. But you have to read it, and you have to kind of see it for the wider picture, and see that it's extraordinary that you can kind of look around and see a lot of, we haven't changed too much, I don't think, as human beings in the centuries since a lot of that stuff was written. We all want to be loved. We struggle with power. We want to be perceived. We want to win. We want to be loved. We want to connect. We don't want to have to work too hard to get what we want. It's all in there. It's pretty amazing. So I feel like all I've ever done as a songwriter is kind of just riff off those themes, and try and read something for other people, or when you connect with other people with something about your experience where the emotion, to be able to write out what that emotion is and spend time with that. And that's what I love putting into my work. And it had that form in Kansas 25. It has a very religious overtone, and now I still think it's present in my work today, even though I've kind of exercised certain vocabulary restraints, so I don't go there and kind of use religious language to express the same things.
Well, no, and again, I'll say it again, the depth of the songwriting at the time, and sort of your maturity or immaturity as a Christian is ridiculous. And I don't want to make it awkward for you, but I want to read a few of the lyrics from Martyrs and Thieves, if you don't mind. Just the verse, like a couple of the verses.
A classic. It is,
it's so good. And I would love the background on this, if it's different than what you've already described, but for the people that are listening that may not know kind of what we're talking about. And again, these are words that a Christian that's been a Christian for 80 years probably doesn't have the maturity and the wherewithal to put on paper like you did as a 20 something new believer. Right. So I just want to kind of call that out. And then I have a follow-up question about some of this, but so the first verse, there's a place in the darkness that I used to cling to that presses harsh hope against time. In the absence of martyrs, there's a presence of thieves who only want to rob you blind. They steal away any sense of peace. Though I'm a king on my knees. And I know they are wrong when they say I am strong as the darkness covers me. That's not bad. This is what I love though. And it goes into a chorus, but I'm not going to like read that. But the next verse, there are ghosts from my past who've owned more of my soul than I thought I had given away. They linger in closets and under my bed and in pictures less proudly displayed. A great fool in my life I have squandered till pallid and thin, hung my head in shame and refused to take blame for the darkness I know I've let win. I mean, come on. That's some good shit right there. Right?
So what an angsty young girl she was.
I mean, really, like, so, there's a lot of questions there, but, yeah, the ghosts from my past who've owned more of my soul. I mean, at the time, right, all the coming out, all those things hadn't happened yet. And I don't even know if like you realized that you may be maybe a lesbian or not at the time, but like the ghosts, what were some of those ghosts for you when you were writing that at 22 or 21 years old?
I mean, the shorthand version, I was like I had a good knowledge of sex, drugs, and alcohol, which, is pretty much part and parcel for most people's college experience. But with my conservative Christian friends, that I was the poster child. Like the fact that I quote unquote got saved was a miracle to, more than a dozen people on my college campus. Like they were like, this girl has like, lived. And so it, one of those kinds of things where, and I think about like particularly that second verse of the ghost from my past. I mean, there was this weird thing where everyone was saying, you have to get right with God because you're living this life of sin. And I was like, okay, nah, I'm not sure I would go that way, but I didn't know, as I was kind of becoming an adult and knowing that there were certain kind of behaviors that I was literally abusing myself. I mean, I was really not in a good place when I came to Christianity. Right. I was waking up in places that I didn't know how I'd gotten there, and a variety of poor life choices that, aside from the moral part, were just unsafe. And I didn't understand why I was treating myself so poorly. And I didn't really I didn't understand it, but I didn't necessarily judge it in the same way that the church was judging it. I just knew that I was looking for some kind of peace and order in my own life, and to understand something about my own self-worth, that I truly wasn't respecting myself or any other human body that was around me. And so like kind of the quintessential moment I think most people are familiar with, like the altar call moment, right? Where it's like, right. Come down to the altar call because you are the sinners, and you can name, all of us can name something of which we would like to confess, or wish that, to varying degrees of shame or, admission that we could do better. And here this altar call would happen every week, and this expectation that I wouldn't look like this person, that they wanted to conform out, and like even like ideas. I'm like, no, I don't want to get into a language. You're not going to slut shame me coming into church just because I have, I've slept with people before I got married. Right. That's not the problem. The problem is that I didn't respect myself or the other people, in marriage or out of marriage. It's not the point. Like I was lost, not because I had sex out of marriage, but because I was abusing myself and other people. And this was a distinction that I was like, I didn't grow up with the Kool-Aid. So the Kool-Aid of shaming me into submission wasn't something that worked. And the poetry that came out of that was trying to reconcile that, am I really contesting something? Like I didn't feel necessarily comfortable with it. Like all the church people are going, that's all I'd ever heard. Or good people are people who are going to get married as virgins. And I'd kind of screwed that up already like a few times over. So what did I do with the shame of that? Because I have a community of people that were shaming me about it. It's like, stop shaming me. Like, that's not the point. And so I think a lot of that showed up in my work. Like I'm going into this place and everyone's reminding me of this past that I have that is marking me as so different because I'm suspicious. I'm suspicious because I have knowledge of other people. I'm suspicious because, somebody would try and teach me something and I would say, well, I hear where you're coming from, but more than just saying Jesus doesn't want me to have sex, can you say something that's actually a little bit more useful to me than just shaming me? Because that's shameful. And why I came here was to get out of shame. And there was something here that was alluring to me that told me and gave me some sign that I might not have to live in shame anymore. So I was looking for those things and real nuggets of that. And I think, by some great accident, the poetry is a reflection of that. I mean, I was just really laboring hard to find something that was actually true and meaningful and something that would last a lifetime and not just something that would get me through this next week or make me pleasing in the eyes of, my pastor or something like that. I mean, right. I really wanted more from my faith in that experience. And so that's what I think about. And that's what, I listen to Martyrs and Thieves and that's what I see. Like I see that contest all over and I'm shocked to know that like I made it, that was a labor that I genuinely appreciate. And I think it stood the test of time. I think that's something of the critique that we should listen to, right? When there's a reason why when we see a billboard that says, God listens, that we somewhat cringe because it seems so, right. So on the surface and so literal that it doesn't take the time to look you in the eye, hold your hand when you really need somebody to connect with you and be there for you and with you and to help you and be alongside you. I think there's no replacement for that. And I just won't settle for anything less in my writing either. So,
I mean, it's beautiful like that. That will stand the test of time. That in the album for sure. But just real quick, I think what's interesting is, if it wasn't for Christians, I think there'd be more Christians, So like,
that's like Gandhi said, it's not Christianity I have a problem with, it's the Christians.
Yeah. Cause like, again, the promise of the gospel, at least my recollection is everything's wiped clean, you're a new creation, all the things, right. But Christians tend to focus on the behavior, the works, the activities, and it's like they're so anti-Christian, and again how they've treated the gay community, right? It's like so un-Christ-like, which I'm going to get to. There's something I'm going to kind of reference in a few minutes related to one of your band members when he posted a couple days ago. But yeah, they're so un-Christ-like. It's like if they'd be more Christ-like, I think the church would be thriving. But there's this crazy tension and this crazy conflict when people look at the people that are followers and it doesn't add up to what, we see when we read the Bible,
Yeah, it's a pretty devastating experience for somebody to say that they love you and then for you to get there and go, I love you if.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a pretty shocking exchange, whether that's, and the curiosity to me about that is, and it's not just a religious thing, but I mean, I think we know that in real life. If you just stop and take a second of like what it's like for somebody that you know and that you've known for a long time, and that you turn to them and say, hey, will you be with me now? And they go, yeah, I'll be with you if, right. Like it's devastating on a human level. So like whether one of the things I talk about a lot is like whether or not you believe in God, you know what it means if somebody says God doesn't love you like that. Like you can be a flat out atheist. It's still an ultimate insult to be able to say you are unlovable. I'm not going to, God won't take the effort. So why should I? Right. That's, to me, that's like the greatest, like it just doesn't make any sense. And regardless, despite religion, like I just don't want to be that kind of human being in the world. And I don't, to borrow one of the phrases of one of my friends, like just ask the basic question: is for the gospel saying that it's good news, right? Is that actually good news? Is anything in here happening that's good news? Yeah. Like, because that doesn't seem like that's good news. That never will qualify as good news that it's conditional. So some part of that story is about what it is about, right, the conditionality of love, and it's a pretty extraordinary and miraculous thing to be able to get beyond the expectations of what people can achieve and just loving people as they come. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the ghosts that were referenced, I know that you talked about like, sex, drugs, alcohol. I think in your, the book that you wrote, a lot of attention was paid to like, oh, she's written a book about coming out, but the lion's share of that book was actually about your childhood and the impact of like divorce, right? That
Yeah.
of your parents and stuff. Is that part of the ghosts
Yeah.
that you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing, like, well, when I went to sit down and write the book, a lot of people were like, and as often happens with notable people who come out, like, oh, let's tell your coming out story, and
Right.
expecting this confessional book about gayness, and I wasn't really
Right.
interested in that. Like always, I'm kind of more interested in the long story, because but still in the back of my mind, one of the reasons why I sat down to write that book is the one of the consistent questions when I was going through the coming out phase and going through all like the slings and arrows and running the gauntlet of hatred and breaking, being considered a rebel and being a disappointment to the church. Like, I wanted to answer the question, why are you so resilient, or how are you able to do this? And the reason why I was able to do that is because I wanted to show the picture that this is a long journey. We are all making a journey, and we're all trying to figure out how to navigate the experiences that we've had to be healthy, to be, to go through disappointments or struggles. So by the time I get to my, so I did the timeline in such a way, it was like, by the time I get to LGBTQ stuff, I hope what people saw was like, this is just yet one and another. This is nothing, this is one and another line of things that I felt like to some degree I was finally prepared for. And, that I knew that no matter how hard or difficult this was to try and have me understood to the rest of the world, that I've been doing the work of making sure that I am the human being that I need to be regardless of the circumstances. So, I don't feel like it, it's not that I want to like lambaste anybody's coming out story, but for me in telling that story, it's often the wider picture or the macro journey that intrigues me more, and not just like a nitty gritty story of how I realized I was gay. I mean, that story is really short. I met somebody, they're really intriguing to me. She went to leave me for the first time, and I like started chasing her down the street, like, don't go away. And it's 20 years later, and I've still got that woman like chained to my ankle because I just don't, life is beautiful with her in it. But I didn't sit there and go through like this kind of narrative that kind of fits those other narratives. I'm always really interested in the wider picture.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. And I think not to like oversimplify all the hard part that was part of the book, right? But I think, one of your conclusions, I think, was, you were young. There's a lot of negative impact of the decision that your parents made to get divorced, right? Like it destabilized a lot of things, which I totally understand and respect. I guess having grown up in the church, divorce was never an option, right? Like never an option. And so like, I look at the topic of divorce, I'm not saying it's different, but it's a different perspective, because I think there's a lot of miserable Christian believers that are married that they should be divorced, and I know that it has an adverse impact. It has an adverse impact on everybody, right? But at the same time,
good relationships are hard to maintain. Yeah, they can be healthy bound, and they can be they can be just as healthy unbound. And I think that's like. The funny thing is like the weird, although like my mother and father were divorced, I still actually grew up in one household. Like the household I grew up with, my dad and his wife were the only family really I'd ever known in that nuclear sense. Like I came home every day. It was the same family the entire time that I lived there. So I think even more than divorce, what I would say is like, to me, it's like dealing with the fractured nature of who we are and who we can be, and shining a light on, I hate saying it, I kind of roll my eyes when I do, but hurt people. And if you can, walking through and any of us having to navigate these, like that's where I'm kind of agreeing with you. Like we can be bound or living in the same household. Hurt people continue, are we going to be as an individual in that scenario, whatever our position is, are we going to be people who continue to perpetuate that harm? Or are we going to try and do the best to heal ourselves through whether it's a minor injury or a major trauma, that's the challenge of our human nature and our work, which, intrigues me, but is, I think it's really easy to go, oh, my parents were divorced, so this is why I'm screwed up. Or, oh, my parents were married forever, but they were nuts and should have gotten divorced. Or they did get divorced and didn't do it well, or whatever the scenario is. We're all gonna, like, for me, it's not like a bad situation's a bad situation. And how we get, whatever that is, it's not necessarily where we are situated, but how we live that how we navigate that situation is really what determines what our character will be, what the impacts that we have on others. And, when we do negatively impact other people, what willingness we are willing to take in that space to be able to heal. And it takes a lot of energy and effort to kind of be in a mindful living. And, I'll circle back around to Ted Lasso. I mean, Ted Lasso's not a saint. He lost his shit on a number of occasions. But I think one of the things that people especially appreciate the timeliness of that writing and that script and those characters is there was a redemptive quality in all of those. And there was always an open door. And even if somebody pissed you off or really hurt you, there was, some kind of encouragement inside the bulk of that series that was trying to say, listen, we can do better, we can aspire to do better, and that's sometimes the best that we can do. But it's the heart that is so meaningful if you're willing to give yourself onto that journey. And I've admired that in any shape. It doesn't have to be in the Bible for me to find it. I can find it in some unnamed people that you'll never know. And I found it, I found it in some of the characters that are in my book, some of the people along the way. And even in the flawed human beings of which I am one that are in my own story. So
no, that's great. That's great. So back to the new album, I guess, was there a song that when you were recording this time around hit different for you, given the last 25 years?
No, I mean, for the most part, I mean, the songs that like Martyrs and Thieves is a song that I've played for a long time. It's just a part of my DNA, that song. Right. And Whole Again is another one. Like the songs that I regularly play, like those are two that I probably will pull out and never not play at some point. They just feel really native to me. And then there are some that I just have forgotten about that I don't really play that much. But there weren't too many experiences where I was just like, whoa. There was a debate that I had about whether or not I was going to include the song Refine Me. It's a ballad that's on the record. And I didn't actually write it. So it was the one song on the record that I didn't write. It is probably one of the few songs that, when I learned it at the time, it was a cover song for me at the time. So a piano player wrote it, and the guitar player that I just kind of got locked into this guitar part that I absolutely hate. And it's also like a pretty, I don't know, like it's both girly and it's a little bit more submissive than my nature and my character is. So I'm pretty uncomfortable playing it. So I debated a lot about whether or not, with the excuse that I didn't write it, that maybe I'd leave it off the record, but it seemed like editing history a little bit to do that. So what I did was actually got a friend of mine, Phil Madera, to come in. I said, listen,
Phil Madera,
That's awesome. I said to Phil, I want to learn this song in a totally new way. So Phil's a wonderful keyboard player, just knowing that the song was originally written by a keyboardist. And I just said to Phil, just learn this song and you make a new creation out of it. Like, do it like you're doing a cover song that you want to speak entirely different. Don't listen to the record. Don't do whatever. And whatever vocal stuff that I have to do, I'll figure it out. I'll find a new way to sing it. But I want you to find a new way to play it. And that was a really lovely experience to be able to go through that. It's still not a song I think that I would, pull out, like to go, hey, this is a song I want to sing every night. But Phil's contribution to that record and playing it in a modern context with a lot of the way that it's kind of interesting. Like Phil's adaptation of it kind of makes me feel like I'm doing like a Barbra Streisand number. Like it's got like kind of these rich jazzy chords with like a little gospel kind of thrown in there. And it's really epic and beautiful. And it's just the two of us doing that song, which is really lovely. It was a pretty redemptive experience to go back. So if I just shut the door to it, I wouldn't have been able to have that experience. And I think what's come out the other side is something really renewed and refreshed.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great. I'll come back to Phil in a second, but you mentioned Steve Hindalong produced it, right? Chris Donahue played bass. right, this time around.
Yeah, you've been paying
Is that
attention to all the
right?
social media stuff we've been putting out there.
All the posts, I'm getting it. And then Matt Slocum of Sixpence None the Richer, is he your
Yeah.
guitarist along with you,
Yeah, I've
right?
known Matt for
Um,
forever. As long as I've been around contemporary Christian music, Matt and I
yeah,
were playing at some of the same clubs before either of us got signed, and so I've been a
nice.
big Matt Slocum fan for a long time. And now that we're practically neighbors, and Steve Hindalong's kind of the glue in between the two of us, so he made sure that Matt got over there and played a lot. But Matt really buried himself in the work. I mean, he was there for hours and just put his head down and just really got lost in the music. And I think it shows up. It's some of the most, I don't know. I'm really honored. Like when I listen to the tracks and stuff, I realize how much that Matt in particular put a lot of his heart and soul into it.
Yeah, that's neat. And then you mentioned Phil. So like, again, I asked you about Rich Mullins. Phil was part of the Ragamuffin Band when Rich
Yeah,
was
for sure.
made that album and toured, and um, so he, and he plays with Emily Harris and all the things. But he, a
Yeah.
couple of days ago,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. Yeah, keep going.
Well, I was going to say, for those who don't know who Phil Madera is, look him up. I mean, he is an American music legend, for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, from all the things that he's been participating with here in Nashville for, gosh, I don't know, 40 years, maybe more. I don't want to make him older than he is, but yeah, he is a storied man who has the talent to boot, and I call him Phil fucking Madera. You can bleep that out if you need to, but like he's just, there's nobody else like him, and the fact that he took the time to work on my record was really fun. And if you haven't checked him out, he's creating all the time, which is really brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. It's like Roy Kent.
You were going to
Roy
say.
F. and Kent. No, yeah, I was just going to say. So yeah, I follow Phil because again, goes back to the Rich Mullins days, but he plays with Buddy and Julie Miller, Emily Harris.
Yeah.
Like you said, he's a legend. But he posted just a few days ago about your album, and I had no idea that he was going to be part of it. But this is kind of what he said, because this kind of goes back to some of the things we've been talking about. Obviously, he says nice words about you and the fact that you know each other a long time. But he's like, when she came out a long time ago, she being Jennifer Knapp came out a long time ago, she effectively ended her career in Christian music. She disappeared. In 2010, he thinks, I was playing with Emily Harris at Lilith Fair in Kansas. I found out that Jen was on the bill, and I sought her out on one of the side stages. I just wanted to let her know she was seen. I find it mind-blowing that LGBTQ people still ascribe to some kind of Christianity when many of the faithful have been so unchristlike to their community. I read that, I was like, damn, like cut to the heart.
Yeah, Phil's a thought. Not only is it an amazing artist, like he's a thoughtful guy, and I think the legacy of working in and around the faith community for a long time, which there's a lot of us musicians here in Nashville that have had that experience. But Phil's a money where his mouth is kind of guy, and he's been around and see a lot of people come and go, and the fact that he's like, I've had an experience in Nashville where some people, it's just the way that it goes, but some people won't touch you, right? Because I can be a third rail in being just coming and playing on a record, because it can maybe get them in trouble with their community. But Phil's an example of a guy who's never really hesitated to do that. And just case in point, I put his name out there in social media because I'm bragging about him, and I just forget that, I'll ruffle some feathers, but I put him out there on social media, and before you know it, like, it didn't even take 24 hours, and they got the Christian haters showing up on his website and giving him hell for hanging out and supporting a queer person. And I think, but Phil's a kind human being. Like, he speaks his heart, and he's also saying, listen, like, you might want to be like that, but not around here, not on my watch, and not with people that I love and I care about. And I think he's a guy that it's nice to see that kind of translate into his person. It translates into his art, and a lot of the community that is one of the reasons why Phil is so beloved here in the Nashville area, and not just because he's an amazing musician, but because he's a human being who wants to have the world full of other good human beings and inspiring them and watching them grow.
No, that's great. So what do you think about what he said about, it's mind blowing that gay people still ascribe to some sort of Christianity given how they've been treated. It's kind of what we were talking about earlier, right? Like Christians are sort of
Yeah.
our obstacle to
Yeah.
Christianity. And I guess, so what do you think about that? And then my question is, you're not part of Christian music, like, the industry, but you're coming out with Kansas 25, which is essentially a Christian album.
Yeah.
Are you hoping and trying to change kind of the evangelical church, or have you accepted that, like, listen, there's going to be factions of it that will never change, and like you're not going to like
Yeah.
worry yourself with that, right?
Well, I do worry about it. I mean, I think, as the theologian part of me says, bad theology is bad theology. I mean, theology that hurts people is just theology that hurts people. And it's not particular, if we're going to qualify it as good or bad or useful or not useful, I think the verdict is out on how devastating the theology that says that God doesn't love gay people has been incredibly damaging. So I think the evidence is there. In that sense, but I also, what I also know from history is that once somebody has an idea about God or a theology and starts to institutionalize it, it's pretty much here to stay. The people that buy into that are looking for things that are the camp of people that they believe. So, like for me personally, I don't really spend my time trying to convert anyone into a pro-LGBT thing, but that's rather to say, and like even spinning off Phil's comment, like it's surprising that LGBTQ people would ever want to go anywhere near the church. And for me, I kind of felt the same way for a long time. But the point is that for those of us who do desire to have a spiritual life, to be around people who understand something about a tradition and a way of fostering our spiritual lives. I mean, look at the same way as yoga. If you want to do yoga, you want to get better at yoga, you go to a yoga studio with other people who know yoga. So if you want to kind of do that spiritual work, then it makes sense, especially when you're doing deep spiritual processing that a lot of LGBTQ people, particularly in the States and in American culture, that is, whether we like to admit it or not, inundated with kind of Christian ideas and concepts of right and wrong and these kind of biblical ideas. Well, that ain't what, it's Adam and Eve, not God and, not Adam and Steve or whatever,
Adam and Steve, right.
Rubbish like that.
Right.
That's out there. And to be able to go through that is still a level of shame, whether you prescribe to that or ascribe to that or not, is still a thing to have to go through in valuing yourself and your own dignity. So why would LGBTQ people go to that space? Because that's spiritual work. So we need a spiritual community that does understand that and opens the door to that, and it's very prosperous. So what I'd say, a lot of times in my advocacy is not necessarily trying to change bad theology. I don't fight that fight anymore. I'm preserving this, I'm in the space going, if you need to leave. And if you need to connect, then connect. Like, don't give up on that. And I would say that regardless of whatever your sexual orientation is, like the institutions themselves are not the authorizers of any of us wanting to have a spiritual quest in our lives. And to find and connect to somebody inside of that community is actually really hard work, and you're going to have to stick to that work, and you're going to make a decision to advocate for yourself to some degree, because for as many people that are out there that would say that you're not invited into this space, I mean, I'm fine with that. Like for me personally, I'm like, I don't want to be in that space. Right. I don't want to be in the space of people who are not interested in my fruitfulness, my dignity, and my flourishing, right? I want to find those people who are invested in that, because it's hard work, it's messy work, and it's beautiful work. And those are the people that I really want. I need their wisdom. I need their support. I don't need agreements, but I do need, like, it does take a village to some degree. So I think that's what I would say. Like if Phil were sitting here, I was like, that's why we go back. We're connected because we're connected to other human beings. There's no way around it. But we will find ourselves, and the church can be that. Like our spiritual spaces can be that, but not everyone can do that. So, I just kind of wipe the dust off my feet, so to speak, of the places who have made it very clear that they don't want to be engaged in that work, and I go out and support the people who do.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right, so a couple more questions, and that you've talked about coming out, like, ad nauseum on interviews and stuff, but I have to ask about the Larry King Live interview. Was that as awkward? Was that as awkward as it looked?
Excruciating. Oh my God. That was like the most painful thing I've ever done on camera in my whole life.
I mean, I remember watching it like in real time, 14 years ago, whenever that was, and then it's on YouTube, and so yeah, if everybody
Can
wants
you be
sort of
gay
a,
and Christian?
I mean, yeah. Well, the funny thing, so like, I need to ask you, like Bob Botsford, have you talked to him since, the pastor that was on there?
No, that rapscallion. No, like he was supposedly there to save
Yeah,
my
like the one that
soul
was with
and to
you.
rescue me, and then
Yeah,
yeah. And I had a gig that night. Actually, I was taping in L.A. and then I had to go down to Orange County, which was about a 2-hour drive, down to San Diego to do a show. Or it was in Orange County, it wasn't quite San Diego, but I had to get in a car
yeah,
and get through rush hour L.A. traffic to go down and do my show. And I said to Bob, I said, well. I was like, if you want to know the people that I'm talking about, come see a show. You can be pissed at me, that's fine, all day long. But don't you dare come and talk one more word about any of this stuff going on. Come down and this is who I'm talking about. These are the people that you are talking against, and I'd like you to come meet them. I'd like you to come, it's not like my audience was like 100% queer, but there were a lot of like, this was
right,
like 15 years ago or something. So there were a lot of like otherwise straight white evangelicals coming to my show that were getting pretty pissed off at feeling uncomfortable in their and not accepted in their religious spaces for whatever reasons. So it was just like, you should come down and hang out and see that what I'm doing is not what you're saying that I'm doing. Like, you think that but it's like, hey man, these are just people looking for love and I'm loving them, and that's what we're going to do here. So if you want to come see that, never came down. I've never seen him again. I've played in the area, and I don't know, maybe I dusted the floor with him just enough that he didn't want to be a mop anymore. But it was just a weird thing. It's just like, man, you say you're here for love, but you're not connecting to any of the people that you're talking to. You're not looking them in the eye, and it was just a weird thing. I didn't know that dude was coming on the show. Like, he shows up, and the Larry King crew was like, yeah, we're going to have this guy on. I was like, who is this guy? What's going to happen? And then Ted Haggard showed up. I didn't know Ted was going to be there
I was
either.
like, oh my God.
I was
I
surrounded
totally
by
forgot
so many dudes. Like,
it was crazy. And here's my take on it. You had Bob sitting next to you, who again proclaims to be, he's a pastor of probably a giant church. He's talking in veiled language of, hey, it's love, but underneath it, you can tell like he basically despises you. Like it's all there. And then you have Ted Haggard, who was remote. He kind of was supporting you, but kind of not. And then I think the one guy
because to
of
be
the
too
three guys
supportive
that
might have made him gay.
Yeah, exactly. The one guy though that supported you was, this 80-year-old Jewish talk show host. Like Larry was actually, you could tell he was kind of like, you guys are ridiculous. Talking to her like this. I couldn't believe it. I was just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, I got through it somehow. Like, it was one of those moments that, I was like, oh my God, like in the middle of it, like, how you have the voice in your head. And I was sitting there going, how did I get here? This is the dumbest thing. I'm never going to do this again. Like, I'm not a big publicity, I don't seek publicity a lot, but it seemed really, one of the reasons why I took the interviews, because it's just like, man, this is enough. Like, we gotta, like, somebody's gotta take the opportunity to like there hadn't been a lot of other like notable Christians that had actually taken responsibility for where they were at. Like, they'd come out or gotten caught coming out or being caught as gay. I was like, I'm not being caught as gay. I'm gay. This is my life. And like, I'm not going to allow yet another like media surge to scandalize a human being who's just living their lives. And I knew that, like it wasn't necessarily for me, like, I'm fine. People can say, I wouldn't be out here in the public eye if I wasn't able to some degree to be able to handle, what other people think about me. But there was a certain point where it's like, I was thinking about my friends and the people that I meet on a daily basis, and my community of people who don't get the voice that I have, going, no, you don't get to do this on top of all of these people's heads. You can't just write people off and write people out of the church, Bob. And Ted, he was nice and redemptive to a degree, but he wasn't exactly claiming anything groundbreaking or standing up for anybody. I just stood there and, tried to survive it as best I can. I think if I had to go back and do it again, I'd probably be a lot more feisty and articulate. But, just being able to go, I feel like, just be there and not cry felt like a victory.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, it was so new for
But
you,
it's part
and
of
now
like
that's a lot of
changing the
pressure.
narrative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, I think over
Well,
time,
cool. So,
particularly when it comes to faith. Oh, sorry, we clearly have a little bit of a lag here, so
no,
you
no,
go. Sorry.
yeah, yeah. No, that's right. Yeah, keep going, keep going.
Oh, what I was going to say is that clearly there's been a narrative inside of like the incompatibility between faith communities and LGBTQ stuff. And I think, I disagree with that largely because we haven't had a voice. And for LGBTQ people now, I think 15 years on, it's not exactly smooth sailing, but the familiarity of LGBTQ plus people, that sexuality is on a spectrum and so is gender, to some degree is not necessarily hard and fast like everybody has always kind of preached, so to speak, that it is. To be able to actually see that people's lives haven't folded over or capitulated, or as, I think one of the things that like conservatives sometimes like to say that, I've chosen to give up and fall into a life of sin. It's not that. It's actually very liberating to know who you are, to be confident in who you are, and to be unashamed of who you are, and to figure out how to live your life with dignity. And that is not a journey that, I think if anything, I would say the LGBTQ community has been helpful to society in saying this is the journey. Like, this is a life's work. It's not about who you were sleeping with. It is about doing the work of understanding and knowing yourself and being able to then, know the difference between the way that we behave when we're living in shame and living in the dark and we're struggling to like figure out who we are in the world. It's a panicky hot mess. But once you start actually coming out, literally coming out of the closet, start to let the light in, so to speak, into your lives and actually embrace who you are, have an education and understanding and an investment in your own development and your own growth and dignity. It's that is, to me, is actually way more a universal prospect. And I think that's a gift that the LGBTQ community has paid a lot of extreme prices for, to be able to get through. That's actually something that we can all share in. It's not just about putting a rainbow flag on the door, but understanding something about the community who has been able to teach something to us inside of a community with their experience, and using that in a positive way rather than just saying, you could write us off or we could be angry or mad. Just going, no, we actually want to be a part of our community and share our wisdom, as particular as it may be, but hopefully that wisdom is a little bit more than just binary, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. It's so nice to talk with you. Would you be so kind to play us some music?
Do you have a special request? As a little girl, I went down to the water with a little stone in my hand, and it would shimmer and sing, and I knew everything, yeah. As a little girl, I went down, but in a little while I got steeped in authority. Heaven only knows what went wrong when there isn't nothing so cruel than to bury that jewel. And it was mine all along, and I'm gonna find it. You're shining, I can see you. You're smiling, that's enough. Where I'm holding on to you like a diamond in the rough, yeah, like a diamond in the rough. Every now and then I can see that I am getting somewhere. Where I have to go is so deep. I was angry back then, and you know I still am, but I haven't lost too much sleep, and I'm gonna find it. You're shining, I can see you. You're smiling, that's enough. Where I'm holding on to you like a diamond in the rough. Yeah, like a diamond in the rough. Snakes in the grass, better step on the gas. Snakes in the grass, better step on the gas. In my dreams I go down by the water with a little girl in my arms, and we shiver and sing, and we know everything. Yeah, yeah, yeah. My dreams I go down, down. I go down. You're shining, I can see you. You're smiling, that's enough. Yeah, I'm holding on to you like a diamond in the rough. Yeah, like a diamond in the rough.
Oh my gosh, that was
There you go.
fantastic.
How do you
Thank
like
you,
them
Jennifer.
apples?
Oh, so good, so good. Thank you, thank you.
Oh,
Let
it's
me
my
just stop
pleasure, mate. My
recording.
pleasure.